Good morning. Welcome to Harris Hall. Welcome to the Tuesday, August 30th edition of the Board of County Commissioners regular meeting. Commissioner Bozovich is excused absent today. We'll be 4 commissioners working on business today, Mr. Mark Heisey. And we'll begin with adjustments to the agenda. Mr. Mark Heisey, are there any today?
No.
Thank you. To the board? And along to emergency business, do we have any emergency business?
We don't.
To the board, I see none. Then we'll move along to public comments. Public comments will be taken in the order that the people sign up and limited to 3 minutes. There's a clock, an accurate clock that'll display on the screen that will show the 3 minutes as they tick down for anyone who's present. If you're presenting testimony online, please monitor your own time. There'll be no signal as 3 minutes approaches. At 3 minutes, I'll say thank you and ask you to conclude. We'll take a testimony for those who have signed up inside of Harris Hall first, and it'll be followed by anyone who may have signed up online, and that queue will be, excuse me, administered by Ms. Jones, whose voice you hear, but you rarely see. So with that, do we have anyone signed up in Harris Hall? We have no one signed up in Harris Hall. Ms. Jones, do we have an electronic signature today?
We do have some people signed up to give public testimony. If you would like to give public testimony at this time and you have signed up remotely, please raise your virtual hand and I will call on you. I do show 3 people have joined the meeting, but I do not see any. Okay, there goes a hand. I will start let me bring our timer up. One moment, let me change the screen. And then we will start with Phil Farrington. One moment, just need to change my screen. And my computer's not cooperating that great. Hold on. Here we go. Hey, Mr. Farrington, I will go ahead and unmute your microphone and you may begin your public comment. You are self-muted, Mr. Farrington. There you go.
Thank you very much, Commissioners. My name is Phil Farrington. I live at 1160 Monroe Street in Eugene. I've been a resident about a block and a half from the fairgrounds for coming up on 30 years. I'd just like to provide support for your efforts to consider a multi-use facility and a stadium for the Eugene Emeralds at the fairgrounds. I think that would be a very beneficial use for not only the Lane Event Center and the fair grounds, but also the neighborhood. Understanding that there's going to be issues, and you've heard complaints from some of my neighbors about concerns of noise or parking or something like that. I think there's also been efforts underway to develop a parking program or pass permit system within the neighborhood. And I think that's up to the city of Eugene to really administer that, but maybe in conjunction with the county. I just encourage you to take all due haste to make sure that we don't lose the M's as a great asset that we have in the community. I think it would be a crying shame if we did that. So I'd encourage you to move ahead with your efforts to incorporate this ballpark and multi-use facility as part of the fair master planning. I know there's been a lot of discussion too about an indoor track. I'd encourage you to consider that as well as a possible addition to the Lane Event Center and County Fairgrounds. I'd rather not see this as an either or. I think it's a both and kind of a proposition, whether both of these facilities are located at the fairgrounds or elsewhere. But I'd really encourage you not to balkanize and run the risk of not having either of these type beneficial uses, but to proceed ahead with the M's first because they're on such a short timeline. Thank you for your consideration. Take care.
Thank you for your public comment. I do show one more person is registered to speak, but I do not see a hand up. So if you are registered for public comment and would like to speak, please raise your virtual hand now. Otherwise, I will return the meeting to Chair Farr.
Thank you, Ms. Jones, for administering the queue, and thank you, Mr. Farrington, for your testimony. I'll turn to the board for any response to public comments and or other remonstrances or comments. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you for your public comment. I wanted to bring up for
the board, just a reminder, we're having Labor Day weekend come up. And there are a couple of events happening this weekend. One that is near and dear to my heart, of course, not only our traditional Labor Day celebration that we haven't had for a couple of years, supporting our trades, but also we'll be having the 2-year anniversary of the Holiday Farm Fire, and there will be a celebration upriver of that anniversary and all that's been accomplished since then, and also a remembrance of all that was lost during the fire. And I would just encourage everybody to join and again offer any additional guidance or directions or things to the public that they may need to be able to join in. I know a lot of people will be having a long weekend. There are some really important notable events on this Labor Day weekend to celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair Trieger, excuse me.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. I appreciate the public testimony about the developments of the Lane Event Center. Some weeks we get more, some weeks we get less. Always in between, we get emails. And as the commissioner in the district, I think I'm getting several just individually. And I appreciate the Mr. Farrington bringing up the issue around parking, and that is a City of Eugene program that they're looking at for street parking. So I want to flag for everyone, as I've been in conversations, some things are City of Eugene jurisdiction, some are Lane County, many things are us working together, which we're endeavoring to do to develop the Lane Event Center thoughtfully and in a timely way that works for Lane County and for the community. And I just want to, again, draw folks' attention that we have an entire website devoted to this project, and it answers a lot of the questions I tend to get, and it includes a special email address and phone number dedicated to the project. So if people have really specific operational questions, that is the best way to get those answered and get those logged with our staff as we move forward in consideration of this complex but really exciting project to improve the Lane Event Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Burney.
How did you know? But you're right, though. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Phil, for the testimony. Appreciate it. I agree with the other commissioners. We're hearing the good, the bad, the ugly as it relates to people's views of that, unlike every other issue that we deal with. And this is a heck of an opportunity, I think, for both efforts. And I think you're going to see a proposed ordinance that embodies that based on our last meeting. As it relates to Labor Day, I would just like to comment that this is, Commissioner Butt mentioned the trades, but the entire service industry, whether it's SEIU, whether it's AFSCME, whether it's Teamsters, whatever sector of the economy, Labor Day is a day that not only commemorates the fact that labor issues are American issues, worker issues are people's issues. And those issues, or those standards as they're called, relate to living wages, they relate to health insurance, they relate to retirement, but they relate broader than that. And I think we're seeing a renaissance and renewal of a redefined labor movement in this country. And we as a body have actually participated in a constructive way toward that. But we're starting to look at more holistic issues, and labor is mental health of workers, education of their children, costs of education, what in fact will be the livable future that we are helping create right now, that frankly, I think young people really need to be far more engaged and mobilized in, because it's their future, not ours, that we're talking about. So I would just like to recognize that. And we'll be recognizing some people from labor in my comments at the end of the meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Then a couple of words from me. The first thing that I've been doing lately, and I'm going to continue doing it, so bear with me. If you turn around and look through the back windows, you'll see a pretty wonderful site. That is the Lane County Farmers Market, and it's new, a year-round site. It's a multi-use facility, but it's the best part of it is it can be operated summer, winter. It's climate controlled. It's open today, so come down and buy some veggies or walk over and buy some veggies. It really is a pretty wonderful place. The second thing is another wonderful thing, Mr. Mokryski. I've been years ago, we started talking about mobile shower units that can be taken to different facilities, different places for the people who are living without existent shower facilities, without existent sanitation facilities. And about 4 years ago, the city of Cottage Grove was able to buy one. It took a long time for them to get it, and I think it cost $60,000 or $70,000, something like that. It was manufactured on the East Coast. It's in use now in the city of Cottage Grove, and it's parked by community sharing there. But they're able to move it around the county wherever they want to put it. Well, last week out at Carry It Forward, which is on county property out on Highway 99, they opened their new mobile shower unit, which cost Mr. Mokryski about $20,000, a little bit less than that actually. In fact, if I do the math right, it's probably about half of that because they made two of them. They were made out at Lane Community College, placed on site, and opened last week for the first time for use last week. There were a couple of operating errors at the beginning, but it is a functioning shower unit that can be wheeled around and placed pretty much anywhere. It's going to be at Carry It Forward for the time being. The second one made by LCC students, I'm not sure where that's going to be placed, but it will be placed. And the funding came through one of our CCOs actually paid the funding on it. The other CCO had been paying rental for a shower unit. Then the second CCO working together, the second CCO bought the shower units, paid for them. And the genesis was a conversation that we had probably 2 years ago is when it started. And it really is pretty cool because these are inexpensive units that we as a county could potentially own. It's on county property, and being able to take them to places where people who have to go to take a shower can actually be where they are living and take a shower. It really is a big step forward for serving the people who are waiting for permanent housing. With that, there was one last thing I was going to say, and it was going to be good, and it's about Commissioner Berney. Oh yeah. Commissioner Berney, I had a meeting in my office this morning with a woman who represents a company who spoke very highly of you. She talked about solar energy and about how capturing solar energy on smaller buildings as well as larger buildings. I'll go into more detail about that, but it really kind of piqued my interest. And I understand she's already spoken with you, Mr. Mokryski, and I'll talk about that later. But I'm really interested and particularly excited that more opportunities are becoming available for more people at different levels to actually access solar power. So we don't have to rely on these power lines that run through the forest that they spray, whatever it is, to keep the power lines free from vegetation growing into them. So I'm pretty excited about that. Just wanted to mention that. I think you may have spoken to her at an AOC meeting at one point, Ms. Mokryski, but that is beyond my business, but it was really exciting to hear. Anything else from the board? Then we'll move forward with our agenda with item 5, which is a consent calendar. We're going to consider a consent calendar that we've all looked at. If you go to today's agenda online and click on view material, you'll see all of the material that the board has read to consider this being on the consent calendar. Anything that would have been a little bit, that would have required debate would have been pulled from the consent calendar. So we have before us a consent calendar. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Berney and seconded by Commissioner Buck. We have our consent calendar. Discussion to the motion. I'm seeing none. Let's vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Passes 4-0 with Commissioner Bozievich excused absent. And Mr. Mokryski, we're going to move along to item 6. It's all right that I keep saying Mr. Mokryski, isn't it? And I have to feel like I'm talking to somebody and not just the air, right?
Here for you.
You've always been. Thank you. Then item 6A, Order 220830-03, in the matter of approving a tentative agreement between Lane County and the Lane County Public Works Association, Local 626. And Mr. Mokryski, will you introduce your panel?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we have Kristen Mayfair here today, filling in for Inga Wood, who isn't able to be here. And so Kristen is going to walk through the 626 contract agreement that we have in front of us. Kristen.
Thank you, Mr. Mokryski, Chair Farr, and Commissioners. I did want to point out that we do have the president of 626 here with us today, Damon Pokolek. We are happy to present to you today the tentative agreement between Lane County and the Lane County Association Local 626, also known as 626. The current collective bargaining agreement between Lane County and 626 expired on June 30th, 2022. The board previously authorized the county's bargaining team to enter into successor contract negotiations through the interest-based bargaining approach with 626 in accordance with the county's bargaining obligations under Oregon labor law. The board established overall priorities, goals, and objectives for the negotiation process, including, but not limited to, awareness of the county's overall budget constraints and structural funding gap, and focusing on creating long-term financial stability in the face of uncertain financial forecasts. The 626 bargaining team and the county bargaining team spent 2 days with the state conciliator to learn about the IBB process and approach this past spring. In traditional bargaining, parties start with opposing concrete positions. Interest-based collective bargaining differs from traditional bargaining by starting with interests, exploring options, and building towards solutions. I had the pleasure of serving as the process facilitator as the parties use this proven method for keeping the focus on interests while maximizing the options available. The approach helped the teams find solutions based on consensus, and this approach is in alignment with the county core behavior focused on solutions. The board is being asked to approve the proposed 3-year successor agreement ending June 30th, 2025, which is included in the packet. A brief summary of the proposed changes is also included in the packet, so I won't go into great detail, but would like to highlight a few changes. In order to address market concerns, we agreed to salary grade adjustments for 12 classifications. The agreement provides a 2% cost of living adjustment for year 1 of the agreement, a 2% cost of living adjustment for year 2 of the agreement, and a 2% cost of living adjustment for the 3rd year of the agreement. All represented employees will receive a one-time payment of $1,500 in 2022, $500 in 2023, and $500 in 2024. Health insurance plans and employee monthly contributions remain unchanged. We also added the holiday of Juneteenth. We added language related to limited duration positions, and we made numerous other changes to clarify contract language. The total additional estimated cost for the proposed contract changes is $3,014,848 over the 3-year contract period. The employees in this bargaining unit provide services within the Public Works Department in the areas of roads, solid waste, fleet services, and parks. These services are funded by a variety of sources, including fees, federal timber funds, car rental tax, state gas tax, transient room tax, and internal transfers. This is the second time we've been able to successfully utilize the IBB process with 626. This allows us to pursue shared solutions in a way that addresses individual membership and leadership interests. We structured this agreement in an effort to advance the strategic priority of our people and organizational health, invest in our employees who are the backbone of our organization, and invest in our systems and organizational health so that employees can thrive and residents can experience a more effective government. We would like to thank 626 for their partnership through this process. Specifically, we would like to thank the bargaining 626 team, Damon Pokolek, Stacy Stroda, Jason Cramblett, and Charles Hill. I'd also like to thank the members of the county bargaining team and staff who helped in preparing and gathering information for the groups. Inga Wood, Lance Inglet, Jeff Bishop, John Roche, Keith McGarvey, Christine Moody, Joe Celesta, Chanel Moody, Crystal Toller, and Valerie Sanchez. 626 bargaining unit members have voted to ratify the tentative agreement. Both bargaining teams recommend approval of the tentative agreement and authorization to the county staff to implement the proposed tentative agreement. That concludes my presentation, and I'd like to open it up for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Mayfair. Questions from the board? Commissioner Buck.
No questions, just a comment. I want to appreciate Local 626 participation in the IBB process. We don't have all of our, contracts and unions on that kind of a process yet. I hope we can. I appreciate you continuing to be a leader in showing how it can be done, and how it actually helps facilitate these types of negotiations and contracts. I hope to see our other union members consider that as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Further discussion? Then, you know, I'd like to maybe invite you to the table. And is there anything you'd like to say, President Perlak? I'd sorry to put you on the spot. I knew you'd say no, but I wanted to give you the opportunity. Thank you. You know, I want to say this, that I personally, when I was in high school in summers, I worked for Tillamook Asphalt Pavers, and I did all the jobs. I drove the truck, but the best part was raking the asphalt and the smell of the asphalt. If you've not experienced it when it's fresh, there's nothing quite like it. After a while, I grew up in Tillamook where the other smells were a little bit more earthy, but shall we say, but the smell of asphalt, I just got accustomed to it, and I love going out with the crews and putting surface coats on roads, even though they do tend to throw a shovel full of hot asphalt on my shoes. That's kind of the initiation process if you do it. So if you ever do it, get ready for a hot foot because you're going to get one. But it really is the work that they do, sometimes in not particularly favorable conditions. You know, you're not in an air conditioned or a climate controlled environment typically, doing hard work that really is the work that most people in our county see first. You know, you drive on our roads, you see the work of the men and women of 626 before you see anything else. You cross the county line, the first thing you see is their work. So thank you very much for that ongoing support you give to everybody. Further discussion? Then we have an order before us. Do I have a motion? Vice Chair.
Chair, I'll move passage of Order 22-08-30-03 in the matter of approving the tentative agreement between Lane County and the Lane County Public Works Association Local 626.
Second.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Buck. Order 22-08-30-03. Discussion to the motion. I'm seeing none. Then let's go ahead and vote. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Passes 4-0 with Commissioner Bozovich excused absent. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the work. And thank you for being here this morning. Then we'll move along to item 7, which is a Health and Human Services section. The first item is a discussion on an informational presentation on the new community provider Equitable Social Solutions.
Chair.
Mr. Mulcahy, I'm sorry, did I?
Well, since we schedule that as a time certain, we can move.
Oh, it is a time certain. You're right. So
Yeah,
we'll
10
move
o'clock, we
down.
can move to 7B, and Eve Gray, our director, is online,
Perfect.
available to present that item. Mr. Dingle is here for item 8A, and then I'll let Jeff Kincaid know to start making his way down here. Just a comment for folks, we don't have our staff sitting down in the meeting waiting for items. They keep working, and then they'll come down when their item comes up. So
since it is a time certain, it's in bold. Ms. Jones, make sure it's in bold, and I put it on the agenda as time certain. I simply had no clue that would move that fast. So move along then to order 22-08-30-04 in the matter of naming the Schenkel Brooklyn Street Shelter located at 1545 Brooklyn Street in Glenwood. Mr. Mulcahy.
thank you, Chair. And Eve Gray is online, so I'll turn it over to our Director of Health and Human Services to walk you through this item.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. I apologize that my camera is not working this morning. I will have to restart my computer after this presentation. But what we have before you is a request to name our Brooklyn Street Shelter, which has been the Schenkel Safe Haven Shelter. And we are proposing that the renaming of that be the Schenkel Brooklyn Street Shelter. The reason for this are twofold. One is the desire, as we discussed in a prior board meeting. I know that a number of you felt very much in support of continuing to honor Reverend Arthur Schenkel in the naming of this particular building. He was a Reverend, an African-American pastor in Eugene. In 1965 was when this particular shelter, what is now a shelter, was built, but at the time was a church. At that time, it was illegal for Black individuals to own property in the city of Eugene. So the church was built in Glenwood, which allowed this African-American church to be built and owned by an individual of color. In 1996, Lane County purchased the church and turned it into the Safe Haven Shelter. We have now renovated this shelter, meeting all of the HUD requirements for an emergency shelter, and would like for the name to also reflect that we are an emergency shelter and no longer operating as a safe haven. So that is why the recommendation for the Schenkel Brooklyn Street Shelter. In addition to receiving staff input, we took the request around a name and what that should be to a subgroup of the Poverty and Homelessness Board, made up of individuals with lived experience of homelessness. And this name was the recommendation that came out of that subcommittee. So I can pause there, and I am happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Director Gray. I'll turn it to the board for questions, unless Ms. Smokowski have anything to add, then to the board. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to appreciate staff work. And this was something that some of us have been in conversation about. And it's really sort of cleaning up and codifying and making clear a long history that has been really honored and respected with Pastor Schenkel. And I just look forward to when we are ready and staff is ready to have some kind of official dedication and ceremony that the community can be a part of. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Further discussion, Commissioner Bernie.
Thank you, Chair. After I won my election 4 years ago, before I assumed office, a gentleman named Steve Moe, who's on the Springfield City Council and grew up in Glenwood, insisted I see a few things, and this was the first. I encourage not only commissioners, but members of the general public to take a walk through. It's truly an example. And not only does it have so much history, but it's really an example of grassroots organizing to provide services to people at a time when government wasn't particularly engaged in that. I also think it's interesting that that the city of Eugene at that time would not allow African-Americans to own property, and they had to go to Glenwood, and forgive the gender-specific reference here, but at the time Glenwood was considered quote unquote no man's land. I mean, it was at that time not a part of either community. So I think the naming is interesting. The reality of the services provided and the history of it is fascinating, and I encourage everyone to not only see what we're talking about, but to support other like community efforts to provide shelter to those in need. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Bernie. Further discussion, Commissioner Buck.
I would just appreciate bringing this to the attention of the public as a whole, and it being something that's elevated to the board for a change. Not only does it acknowledge our history and what our roles are in presenting that history today to the public for educational purposes, but also highlighting wonderful individuals in our community that often are overlooked and not noticed and not acknowledged for their good work simply because they have a different color of skin. So thank you for bringing this forward, and I am absolutely in support.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Then I'll state this, that the continued use of this facility to address the needs in our community for those who need the most, who are at the base level of safe and secure dwelling. I visited the Schenkel Center more than 10 years ago when Shelter Care was operating it, and it was being used pretty efficiently by Shelter Care. It was used as a day center where people who were living on the streets could come and sometimes nap there all day, sometimes read, but to have a level of discussion with their fellows. It's a very peaceful place. Served hot meals. They had dormitory living for a few people, and Shelter Care did a superb job of running the Schenkel Center for a lot of years. Now, Shelter Care, like all of our nonprofits, Mr. Mokrajski, is suffering from staffing issues, and also they're suffering from an inability to pay the staff what the staff is worth, what the work that they're doing. Often they're paid very close to minimum wage, and often they have professional degrees and certainly have professional hearts to do their work. And we have an ongoing desire by this board stated often and over again that we'd like to address our nonprofit issues regarding staffing and regarding their ability to pay them, whether it's at the local level or whether we get the federal or state government to help us to make certain that the people who are doing this work are compensated in a way that makes them continue to do the work, the very valuable work. But once again, thank you for the Director Gray for the work that went into this facility, repurposing it, continuing its purpose, and the naming, which we're all very excited about. And I agree with Vice Chair Trieger that at some point we'll have a more formal ceremony out there to really shine a light on it, because a light needs to be shined on it and a lantern needs to be hung on it. And we can commemorate it with some form of a plaque or a monument that talks about the history of that particular property. So with that, to the board, any further discussion? Then we have before us Order 220830-04. Do I have a motion? Vice Chair Trieger.
Chair, I'll move passage of Order 22-08-30-04 in the matter of naming the Schenkel Brooklyn Street Shelter located at 1545 Brooklyn Street, Glenwood, Oregon.
Second.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Berney. Discussion to the motion? I'm seeing none. I'll call the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Passes 4-0 with Commissioner Bozievich excused absent. Then we'll move down the agenda until we approach a time certain, Mr. Mokrajewski. We reminder that we do have a time certain 7A, which is the introduction and informational presentation on our new Equitable Social Solutions partnership. But we'll move down to County Council. And I see that Mr. Dingle is with us in the audience, and we'll ask Mr. Dingle to step forward. And today we have Order 220830-05 in the matter of engaging the law firm of Barron Budd, Tom DeMore, Dixon Diab, and Chambers to initiate litigation regarding the Holiday Farm fire. And I'm going to directly speak to you, Mr. Dingle, because you are an employee of the board. So I'm not going to go through Mr. Mokrajewski. And as I said earlier, I like to talk to somebody rather than the air. And Mr. Dingle, thank you for being here this morning. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Board, you will recall that we did, the board held two executive sessions on this matter, one back in July of 2021 and last Tuesday. At that time, presentation was made to the board about, by these law firms about the potential litigation involved in Holiday Farm fire. Based on that conversation, I prepared this board packet, which basically is a retainer agreement, a contingency fee agreement with these three different firms to pursue litigation. And the reason this is time sensitive is because I believe it's September 7th is the statute of limitations. And that's why I had a calendar tickled to bring it back, because we had, if the board was going to decide to go this way, it had to happen before September 7th. So they had the opportunity to file. I will note that two of these firms we've worked with in the past. I worked with Mr. Fisk's firm and obviously Mr. DeMore's firm on the opioid litigation, and there's going to be more litigation there, but that's all I really have unless the board has a question. This is a pretty standard agreement. I will, and because you'll note the second part of the order delegates authority to county council, because there are different kinds of agreements that will need to be signed. For example, common interest agreements where the litigants agree to keep certain information confidential from the other side. And I did in the past, that's never been something that the board wanted to get down in the weeds with. So, but there are things that do need to be signed. So that's all I have in this.
Thanks, Mr. Dingle. And we do have, this board does have experience talking about this because as the public knows, we do sometimes enter into executive session, and sometimes the executive session contains discussions that are brought out later in public. And that basically is where we are today. And this is a matter of keeping options available for the future at this point in time. Discussion to the board. Commissioner Berney.
Mr. Dingle, I think I know the answer to this question, but for the public, it's my understanding that we really are bound to do this simply because we accept FEMA dollars as part of support for providing service after the Holiday Farm fire. And is it correct that any government entity that receives FEMA dollars by law has to at least do everything in its ability to recover dollars? And because is that correct?
Chair Farr, Commissioner Brady, that is correct. There's a, and I believe I forwarded it to the board based on the conversation in executive center, the executive session, excuse me, the regulation that's in place that when a governmental entity takes aid from FEMA, then they have to make a good faith effort to try and recoup wherever they can the cost.
So this in no way is Lane County trying to position itself against other public bodies or public entities that serve the public. This is something that by law we're required to do.
That's correct.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Further discussion, Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Dingle, and your work briefing us in executive session. And this is, again, mostly for the public. I just want to restate, as Chair Farr mentioned, this is us keeping the door open and keeping as many options on the table as possible, not taking an explicit action. And it's always just really difficult. I mean, this whole situation is difficult on so many levels. And as Commissioner Burney mentioned, it really isn't us out sort of trying to wring dollars out of blood from a stone where it's not deserved. It really, we have to keep the options open. Suits will be and have been filed in this case. And so it's just important to the public to know this is a step along the way. And one other thing I wanted to mention, I was reminded, because as you mentioned, we've had 2 presentations from this firm. I think it's important to understand that many of the principals in this firm have experience being impacted directly by wildfires themselves. So they really have a great 360 view of the impacts of an event like this on their own communities and from the legal side. And so I just appreciate that we've engaged these folks in particular. They really, having looked through their website and researched a little bit who they are and other situations like this that they've taken on, I feel like we're in good hands and can really trust them and you to work with them to get us to the best conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Trieger. Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. This issue is exceptionally emotional for the people that are upriver. We are, as I mentioned earlier, coming to the 2-year anniversary and remembrance of that this coming weekend. And people will hear about this today, I'm certain, and we'll wonder what it means. And it's our understanding that this is a legal obligation to do so. It's not anything that we will probably see immediately, most likely take years to process through these litigation efforts. And we are doing this probably in conjunction with many other fire affected counties across the state who also have the legal bounds that we've been going through here, utilizing federal and state dollars. So I hope that that gives clarification for the folks upriver, and knowing that they'll be going through a lot. Each anniversary, they go through quite a bit emotionally and do an intake of what's happened and where we need to go in the future. There's a lot to be done, and it will take years and years for us to get through the rebuilding process. And in many cases, some people will process the trauma for the rest of their lives. Thank you, Chair.
And thank you, Commissioner Buck. And a couple of things, Mr. Dingle. I'm going to talk about the order itself ever so briefly, and also just the general nature of orders. Your office prepares orders that we pass and sign and read, and that's a function of the county council. One of the things that you do, and if you look at our orders, there's an order title, a series of whereas, and then the therefores. The whereas is kind of where the decision making comes from. That's where the sausage making is, in the whereas. And it's important to look at that, because when we're through talking here, there's going to be a transcript of the meeting that we have, and there'll be a audio, video minutes will be kept on it. But years and years from now, the thing that people will look at is this order, because they don't particularly care what we said. But it's important that every word in this order is accurate and that it actually reflects the history of the discussion that we're having today. And if you look at the whereases throughout this order, it does reflect the history, not just of the discussion that we have had in private, in executive session, but what we brought forward today. We've not spoke about all of it, but each commissioner has talked about the final whereas, which the Lane County Board of Commissioners has both a fiduciary duty to their taxpayers, as well as a separate legal obligation to use every means possible, ... That's where people can really see what it is that the deliberation that goes into the therefores, which is the actual action that we're taking. Your office does a superb job, and any order that is prepared here in Lane County comes through the Office of County Counsel. And I look at orders that are from 50 years ago sometimes, and I sometimes think, who's the idiot that signed that order? Well, the idiot that signs this order today will be me. And and years in the future, this is the real record that people will look at. And so, Mr. Dingle, Mr. Dingle, thanks for the diligent work that you oversee in your office that produces these orders that really are the historical record that people in the future will be looking at.
And to that point, Chair, in addition to the order, one of the things that we, in conjunction with Ms. Jones, have done is make sure that with every one of these orders, there is a board packet for the very reason that you're talking about, because it is extremely frustrating when we go back and we have to look at an order. You're going to hear, I think this happened with some of this TRT stuff, where you're just basically looking at an order and nobody knows what the thought process was. Nobody knows how it got started. Nobody knows why particular language was selected or why they chose the path they did. And so that's one of the things that we've been doing since I've been here, is making sure that no matter how small it is, we make sure that there's, in addition to the order, a board packet. So there is, in essence, some local legislative history, so that 30 years from now, someone can look at this and understand why the board made the decision that it did.
Precisely. And, you know, one thing I'll add to that, Mr. Dingle, is that a part of the order is always a staff recommendation. The Board of County Commissioners is here for policy making, sometimes for actual decision making regarding what it is that we're going to ordain. But really, there's always a staff recommendation that is prepared typically by professional staff who this is what they do for a living. What we do for a living is give you a framework. What they do for a living is make sure that this stuff is accurate. So that is where the work occurs. I don't usually talk about this, Vice Chair, but we had a few more moments today, and it's quite often the orders go by without us really acknowledging how they are prepared and why they're prepared. So, and Commissioner Berney.
Only because there's time, Chair. I'd like to make 2 points, if I might. One is, yes, that I've been very impressed with the openness. What do you call that? What's that word? Transparent. That's the word. With the transparent nature with which the county does business. Ironically, in political seasons, people say we're not transparent. No matter what side of the aisle one happens to be on, and there is always a record, and there is always background, and there is also, thank you for that, and thank you for pointing that out. Because the chair mentioned that people won't remember what we say, I'm going to say something, and that is deeper than this particular issue, which obviously we'd be voting on. Underlying this was a fire. Underlying that fire to remote communities had to do with transmission lines, forests, climate change, dry conditions, and this is only going to become exacerbated as we move forward. This, interestingly enough, Chair Farr mentioned a woman talking to him about solar earlier, and solar is one of many renewable energy types. We now technologically have licked the issue of renewable energy production, energy storage, and energy deployment. So what this really is, this problem is an opportunity, and I fear we won't take advantage of it, an opportunity to rethink energy production, especially in rural communities, and eliminate the need for transmission lines, which are fire hazards in and of themselves in this environment, and start looking at communities producing and creating their own energy, supporting themselves. So in addition to just looking at large buildings as energy producers as well as buildings, we are looking at communities. We can do this. We ought to do this. And if we just spend money building more power lines and we don't bury those power lines, or just building power lines to replace what was, we are inviting the next series of disasters. So I just wanted to use this time, sorry, Mr. Dingle, I don't want to waste your time, but to make that point for the public. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner. Electricity is dangerous, and the less distance we have to carry it, the better off we are.
Yes, sir.
Vice Chair Trigger.
Chair, I'd like to make a motion and then after that, just, or before I do, just point of order and looking at our agenda and timing, I see we've assembled folks. So if we have the people we need to start our 10 a.m. time certain, if the folks are here, we can do that. Otherwise, we may be able to fit item 9A in before 10 a.m. So just looking to our administrator and the team for that. And while they look at that, I will make the motion that we pass order 22-08-30-05 in the matter of engaging law firms of Barron and Budd, Tom Demore, and Dixon Diab and Chambers, and to initiate litigation regarding the Holiday Farm fire.
I'll second.
Moved by Vice Chair Trieger and seconded by Commissioner Buck. Order 22-08-30-05. Discussion to the motion. I'm seeing none. Then I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Passes 4-0 with Commissioner Bozievich excused absent. I prefer to not start the 10 o'clock before 10 o'clock. So let's move along with whatever we can. Mr. Dingle, before you leave, do you have any announcements that you need to make?
No announcements.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Mokrajski, do we have time for 9A, do you think? We have about 10 minutes.
Mr. Kincaid is here with us. Thank you.
Yeah, my comments will be shorter than
Okay.
10 minutes. We have allotted, so.
Then we have item 9A, which is the first reading and setting the second reading, etc. Read if you want the content. Mr. Mokrajski.
Thank you. Jeff Kincaid, our management analyst in county administration.
Thank you, Mr. Mokrajski. Good morning, Chair Farr, Commissioners. My name is Jeff Kincaid. I'm a management analyst in county administration. This item is a first reading for Lane Code Chapter 4 amendments. There are four main things we're addressing in these amendments. One is allowing Oregon Department of Revenue to act as tax administrator for transient room tax. I'll probably refer to it as transient lodging tax because that's a big portion of the changes we're making. The second is to address local revenue sharing. Mr. Dingle alluded to that briefly. The third is to update out-of-date terms, and the fourth is to declare an emergency. So this item is being brought forward because the city of Eugene provided notice in early 2022 that they were going to take advantage of a 2017 amendment to ORS 305.620 that allows Department of Revenue to collect transient lodging taxes on behalf of cities. They've been able to do it on behalf of counties, I think, for a couple of years before that. But the city of Eugene wanted to take advantage of that. And with that change, they gave us notice that they weren't going to administer on our behalf any longer, which has been a pretty longstanding agreement. 1973 is when they started collecting on our behalf. So they've been doing it for quite a while. In addition, the cities of Cottage Grove, Florence, and Springfield are also transitioning to Department of Revenue to administer their local tax. The vast majority of the proposed changes are really to align with the Department of Revenue requirements to allow them to administer. And they were primarily taken from a model ordinance developed by Department of Revenue and the League of Oregon Cities. So lots of eyes have been on these, and then we put them into our code. For your awareness, we did consider the alternatives of bringing the administration in-house, hiring county staff and bringing that on board, but given the timing and cost, it really wasn't practical, especially the big benefit of all the other providers or all the other cities that have their own tax also going to the state. It makes it a lot easier for those transient lodging providers to then pay the tax if everyone's using the same administrator. For the local revenue sharing piece, we really just cleaned up the language to reflect what has actually and will continue to happen. The language now says that each city that wants to participate has to pass a resolution. It has a few points. Mr. Dingle alluded to our Assistant County Counsel, Marcus Vehar, did tons of research, could not find a single one of those kind of resolutions, but we've still been providing revenue sharing. So that's to those cities that don't have their own tax. We share 60% of the 5%. So essentially we're sharing 3% within those cities, which is consistent with the discount that's provided for people paying the tax that are in cities with their own tax. They get a 3% off the county portion. So it's essentially the same for the county. The update to terms are intended to both align with the Department of Revenue and also reflect the current lodging market. If you read it, it doesn't read how lodging looks like in the county, especially transient lodging. It refers to rooms a lot and really hones in on hotels, but the lodging market has really changed. And I think this language modernizes it, but also allows for future change. It's transient lodging providers. We're not honing on a very specific subset. So it provides that future flexibility as well. And importantly, there are no changes to the tax imposed or dedicated uses of the collected tax with this. This is just the administrative work to ensure that Department of Revenue can collect on our behalf. This item does declare an emergency. We've known about this since early January, but with the assessment of what we could do and also ensuring that this would be a smooth transition, we weren't really confident until the last few weeks that we can do this transition. The Department of Revenue team is somewhat new, so getting all the reporting requirements and making sure we were comfortable was really important before we brought these changes. So it declares an emergency so that we're targeting an October 1st date. So with the second reading and public hearing tentatively scheduled for the 13th, we wanted to make sure we had these in effect before that October 1st transition date. If the board does choose to approve the first reading, staff has reserved a 1:30 p.m. time certain on your September 13th agenda for the second reading and public hearing. Since this is a code change, it requires an ordinance, which requires two readings at least 13 days apart. So we've planned for that. Lastly, I also want to recognize it's not just me. I'm just sitting up here presenting this item, but we had a team working on this. Christine Moody, Greg Holmes, Robert Tintle, and Marcus Vehar were all very important in ensuring that this was brought forward. And most of them are available for questions if you have any today. And that concludes my presentation, Chair. I'll pass it back to you for any questions or discussion. Thank you.
Captain Kincaid.
Yeah.
Discussion from the board. This is a first reading and accepting the first reading and setting a second reading. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Just a really quick clarifying question. As you mentioned, we're really moving towards modernizing our language and calling it transient lodging tax. And I noticed in the memo, it's primarily referred to as TRT. I'm guessing because that's from the state backwards. And then once or twice it's TLT for this moment forward. But just to start training my language, we should be talking about this as TLT, as transient lodging tax from this moment forward. Is that right?
Chair Farr, Vice Chair Trieger, it's kind of weird we're playing in both worlds, right? If the board approves on September 13th, I would say at that point we would start doing transient lodging tax. I don't see a lot of reason why we wouldn't move forward, but yes, that's really what's referred to around the state.
And that functionally there's no real difference. It's a semantic matter. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Further discussion? I'll just mention, Mr. Kincaid, that 73 was a big year. I was a freshman at the University of Oregon, and I met my wife that year. And that's when we established what is now archaic language. So with that, I'll ask for a motion to pass the first reading and establish the second reading for September 13th. Do I have a motion? Commissioner Buck, excuse me.
I'll move approval of the first reading and setting the second reading and public hearing for ordinance 22-06 for September 13th, 2022, 1:30 p.m. time certain.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Buck and seconded by Commissioner Burney. We have the first reading and establishment of the second reading. Discussion to the motion. Just a procedural discussion. The September 13th meeting was initially not a meeting of the Board of County Commissioners. It was established for a couple of reasons. I will not be at that meeting. Vice Chair Trieger will be handling the gavel. If I'm there, I'll be in a different time zone, probably very sleepy-eyed, but I will not be handling the gavel. So further discussion to the motion, I'm seeing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Passes unanimously. Passes 4-0 with the Commissioner Bozovich excused absent, and we're moving very closely to our 10 o'clock time certain. Thank you, Mr. Kincaid.
Thank you very much.
Then perhaps, Mr. Mokrajski, if you have short announcements, we can begin your announcements while the 10 o'clock time certain team steps forward.
Sure. The one thing I just was going to make note of is we do have a new county clerk, and we will have an opportunity to bring our new county clerk to meet you. in person. Her name is Dina Dawson, and her first election will actually be next week. We have, as the board I think is aware, we have a recall election scheduled for Tuesday, September 6th. And as of the end of day yesterday, we had 2,117 voters that had returned their ballots. That represents approximately 15.64% of eligible voters in that particular election. So, and hopefully before the November election, we'll have an opportunity to bring Dina to you to introduce you to her so that you get to see the good work that she is doing. With that, I think I'll introduce our group, or if we're ready to move on. Chair, if you want to introduce the item.
The clock on the wall's fast. We are moving ahead. So I apologize to anybody who, well, I'll apologize at 10 o'clock to anybody who may be joining late online. Ms. Moker-Heisky, let's go ahead and move forward with our 10 o'clock time certain, which is a discussion and informal presentation on our new community provider, Equitable Social Solutions. And I believe that Director Gray is online. Ms. Moker-Heisky.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Director Gray is online. And so I think what I'll do is hopefully she's had the opportunity to reboot her camera and be available. And if she wants to introduce this item, I'll turn it over to Eve.
I'm happy to introduce the item. I did restart my computer, and for some reason that camera still doesn't want to work. So I'll do this just by audio today. But I believe I see Kate Budd sitting there, and we also have some representatives from Equitable Social Solutions. And I haven't had the opportunity to meet at least one of you. So I will let you go ahead and introduce yourselves and start a presentation. I can say that we are very excited about this partnership and bringing a new provider into our community. So I will turn it over to all of you.
Good morning. I'm Stacia Peters. I'm working with Equitable Social Solutions. And with me today is Nicole Gagne.
Nicole Gagne, Vice President of Operations with Equitable Social Solutions, as well as Equus Workforce Solutions, another one of our organizations.
Great. So the PowerPoint, am I pulling up the PowerPoint?
And while we're getting that PowerPoint going, I can also just mention that although we had hoped to open the Navigation Center this week and welcome residents into that center, we are still working through a few outstanding questions that we have remaining on, liability related to a low barrier shelter. So our legal teams are working together on that. And that is proceeding, and we will have a new date for welcoming individuals into our Navigation Center. Hopefully here shortly. We will keep all of you informed about that.
And Director Gray, I will state that Assistant Director Inman is also in the audience today. Thank you, please.
So thank you. We are so excited to be with you guys today and to now be in Eugene, Oregon. As I mentioned before, I'm the Vice President of Operations for Equus Workforce Solutions as well, which has a 30+ year experience doing the business of the federal government, as well as states and counties and cities throughout the United States when it comes to workforce development. So it was about in 2014, and I'm looking at Stacia Peters because she was the regional director that really led the charge for us with San Diego County and in starting to do the business of this work. We have a long-standing relationship with San Diego in helping them to help house individuals experiencing homelessness. It was through at the time of COVID-19, where the county realized, what are we going to do to help this population? And that was when we actually created a non-congregate shelter for them. And Stacia's going to talk a little bit later about the outcomes, but it was at that time, let's see, a little under 2 years ago, I started talking to our president, who's my boss, Mark Douglas, and said, what we're experiencing in Southern California when it comes to homelessness is what communities all throughout the country are being faced with. A lot of people want to do good work. A lot of people want to do their part, but how do we go about it, right? And it was at that time, I was only, less than 2 years with the organization, and went to him and said, hey, I think we need to start an organization, a company, a separate company from Equus, to start doing this work. It's an unfortunate need, right? But a very timely and necessity, quite honestly, in major cities throughout the country. We started seeing counties and cities getting funding, but wondering, how do we start tackling this? Where do we go? Where do we start? And so Mark and I realized, who better than us? Why not us? Through working with our corporate shared support services teams and marketing, the name Equitable Social Solutions came about. Equitable is something that we are quite passionate about within our organization, in trying to create better equity for those that have disproportionately experienced, whether it be racism, homelessness, all of the unfortunate things that can happen to you, right? As you're trying to live your life as a citizen in our country. And we started looking at our teams, and we realized that we actually had an organization to start developing. And we went to Stacia in San Diego and said, hey, we want you to help lead the charge for that. And although she's still, I tell her, say she has a very big job. She has a team in Southern California, but she has helped us, to really create the mission of Equitable along the way. Station. So when we look at this map, we started in San Diego, California. And then our next deal with Equitable came in Dane County, Wisconsin. Interestingly enough, we don't even have workforce operations there, but another county right outside of Madison, Wisconsin, that's quite honestly reminds me of Eugene, being faced with just large numbers in regards to, when you look at their population and size, large numbers of individuals experiencing homelessness. And I'm so appreciative of their county board of supervisors and their team, because they gave a chance to us when they started looking at the experience of our organization in doing business and helping individuals find workforce opportunities. They bought into the story, our narrative of trying to meet people where they are today. There's no way we can get them employed if we just dismiss where they are today in their life. And if someone doesn't have stable housing, how in the world are they going to go about trying to find the right workforce opportunity? So we started that journey with them. Stacia, remind me, that was probably about
a little over a year ago.
Yeah. That was just at January, right around New Year's. We stood that congregate shelter up for them. And then came City of Chicago, where we've had long relationships with the county there, as well as the city, another city in turmoil. I'm trying to figure out how to best face on this challenge. And although they have several different organizations that they partner with, they agreed that Equitable could be of help to them. And then we started looking at the Pacific Northwest, where we have had great relationships with counties throughout. We do business with Northwest Oregon on the Equus Workforce Solutions side, in the Tillamook, in that part of your state, as well as in Washington with Pack Mountain Workforce Development Board, as well as Vancouver. And quite honestly, again, as I traveled, as Mark traveled throughout the Pacific Northwest, we realized that we could, our Equitable Social Solutions brand could be of service here. And when we saw the RFP for Lane County, we said, let's go for it. And so thank you. We are so excited to be able to start doing this work in your county. Our approach, as I mentioned earlier, is really meeting individuals where they are, trying to dispel myths, trying to not be judgmental, recognizing that a lot of individuals that are experiencing homelessness are either in crisis in some sort of way, whether they have mental health challenges, whether they're facing addictions, whether they've had experienced different forms of trauma in their lifetime. Something has gotten them to that point in time, and I always, when I speak to our teams throughout the country, everybody needs a little grace. Everybody needs a little grace. Everybody needs an opportunity. Everybody needs a personal cheerleader. That's what our case managers, that's what our project directors are for many individuals, is they're trying to help them forge a way forward in life, and not get stuck in the moment, not get stuck in the peril that they're experiencing. And you can advance from there, and so with that, as I had mentioned earlier, our organization, our president, Mark Douglas, who whenever I get the chance to speak about him publicly, I am always just so proud to be able to represent him today, as well as our organization. Not too many presidents of corporations would give an African-American girl and a wonderful woman like Stacia a chance to start an organization because we believed in something. I had only been with Equus, as I mentioned to you, for about 2 years, but we made a pretty compelling case to Mark and the board, and he's allowed us to now go forth with Equitable Social Solutions. So very proud of him and proud of our organization. Underneath, as mentioned, we have Stacia, who's serving as regional director of our Equitable Social Solutions projects throughout the West. And then we have a wonderful group called our Service Delivery Team, which is run by a woman named Deb Giordano, who has been with Equus, gosh, for over 15 years, has been in the human services arena for over 25. And her team of about 25, 30 people actually support our operations on the Equitable as well as the Equus side, helping to start up new relationships once we've come to contract agreement, from the onboarding of staff, from the training, ongoing training, and development in order to put forth a stellar operation in local communities throughout the country. And then I'll let Stacia actually talk about the org structure of our local team here. I know, of course, we have David, who I believe some of you have met, who's local, who's from the community, who's worked within human services for quite some time now. Mm-hmm. We can talk about the rest of that team.
Sure. So yeah, as she mentioned, the local team was all hired. They're all from Lane County. We have people from Florence to Springfield working at the center. This is our org chart as it stands now. The only person on that org chart that isn't in town is the project accountant, and we are still working on finding a project accountant locally, but we just haven't had much luck as of yet. And I think we were a little more focused on the programmatic staff. So she's helping out for the time being. So she's working remote to help out. And as Nicole mentioned, our service delivery team really helps support us when we start up a project, but really the project ends up having a very local flavor. Our organization has a culture that's built on the word legacy, which is an acronym. And legacy to us means leaving people in places better than how we found them. So we're very passionate about impacting communities for good. So all of these people that we have onboarded, like one of them I noticed I just heard this morning, Haley is actually going to be promoted to a program coordinator. So she's been with us for 2 weeks and we've already identified that she's very strong and very knowledgeable with the local community and the populations. And so she's in the process of being promoted already. And they all come from the local community and are really happy to be at an organization where they get really great benefits. They never have to, we're very financially stable, so there's no worries about that. Some of them did share stories with us that in the past they weren't always in that situation, so that's been nice. We do have people on staff locally who have lived experience, which is something else we're really passionate about, is really representing the population that we're serving. We have a couple of different languages represented, but we also have access to the language line if we need that. But that's our current River Avenue Navigation Center.
And then just to support that, what we've done recently is realized that, you know, quite honestly, I don't think there's a for-profit or nonprofit organization that has substantial experience, right, in trying to solve this problem. And although our hearts and our minds are committed and we're all in and passionate about doing this, we've decided as an organization to bring on a consultant who's nationally renowned, that has worked, actually, we met, he used to be a part of the San Diego County Department of Homelessness and has done consulting work with other counties, but we've now contracted with him to make sure that we're always staying as far ahead as we can. He will actually, within probably the next 30 days, be flying up to Eugene to just assess on our behalf the shelter itself and making recommendations based on his experience. And he will be doing that throughout our projects because we only know what we know, right? And we want to make sure that the brand and the reputation and the due diligence that we've provided on our workforce development side of Equus begins with an equitable. So you guys will also benefit from Omar Passons is his name, benefit from his expertise, as well as when Station mentioned our local employees, excuse me, here in Lane County. That's something that Equus has done all over the United States throughout the years. It's very important if we're going to, embed ourselves in a community, trying to help individuals. Those individuals doing that work need to come from the community, understand the community, be committed to the community. And so it's a value that a national organization such as ours can bring. But if that's not partnered with a commitment to local employees and to the community, that's not going to work. And so we have found that it's the only way to go, is to try to find the best, the brightest, the most committed and experienced individuals in the local community to then bring on to our team, and then partnering with them as well as other local community partners in order to do the work on behalf of the county.
So I'm sure you guys are all aware of the facts on homelessness, but we do include this when we do presentations, just in case people aren't aware. But this is based on the information from the National Alliance to End Homelessness from January of 2020. We know in April, I was in Seattle at the Housing First Partners Conference. You know, there were 42 states and 7 nations represented. This is not just a small issue. It feels it's local for the people experiencing it, right? But there is actually an issue going on in, I think, our nation and to some extent globally. So it's just important that we wanted to share that with you guys. And then this is from 2021, the number of households with children. It's just important, again, to be aware of how the demographics break down. The key strategies for homeless solutions that Equitable currently uses are both best practice models, harm reduction, and the housing first model. I'm sure you guys are familiar with both of them. There are virtually opposite ends of the spectrum from what people think harm reduction is or isn't, right? So we try to define our version. For Housing First, we know it prioritizes providing permanent housing to people experiencing homelessness. And the idea is that we need to have people with basic shelter based on Maslow's hierarchy, right? That it's important that people have those basic necessities before they can try to look at anything else in their life. And it's just better for people to be safe and to be sheltered. We recognize in Housing First the importance of client choice. Harm reduction is really about meeting people where they're at. I'm sure you guys are aware of these. We're very intentional about really looking at each situation uniquely and ensuring that however we're providing services, the number one priority is always safety for people in the environment, and ensuring that and making sure that when we're doing harm reduction, that the services we're providing that may be good for someone, that they aren't harming someone else. So that's our harm reduction and Housing First. And then just to talk a little bit, like Nicole said, we're in 4 different states now. We have 5 different projects in San Diego currently. The vulnerable populations or the COVID sheltering hotels have closed down as of June 30. But we still have several other contracts there. So we have a contract that's a regional homeless assistance program. In the last year, from July of 2021 to 2022, we served 425 households. Of those households, 160 were placed into permanent housing. And of those, 35% were placed within 6 months. And since the inception of that contract in 2020, we've completed over 545 housing applications for individuals on that project. Outcomes are really important to us because it actually represents lives changed, right? It's not just about going through the motions, but actually impacting lives for good. Our California Emergency Solutions for Housing, that's a much smaller project, but 61 households have been placed in permanent housing. That project also does some got a pilot rental subsidy program that we're running. And then we also do homelessness prevention and stabilization services on that contract. And we've had 35 households that are on that rental subsidy pilot program. And then this is just a success story from somebody who was served out of the Regional Homeless Assistance Program. When clients come to us and want to share their story, we're always, we feel like it's great for the future people that we're serving to hear from people with the lived experience. So this is Yadira. And then our next outcomes in San Diego County was from that COVID sheltering program that Nicole alluded to earlier. We served more than 13,000 people in the community of San Diego. 2,900 of them were experiencing homelessness and transitioned to safe shelter post-isolation services. We split that program off into a high-risk household. There was 300 high-risk households to begin with, and we placed 240 of them into permanent housing. And then we have a success story here from somebody who came through this program, and we were actually able to partner on a couple of programs. So just sharing to make it real that, lives really are impacted, which is, I think, what we're really passionate about. I know what I'm certainly passionate about is trying to bring together all of the partners in the community to figure out what works best for each person, to meet them where they're at and help move them forward to whatever they choose to be there. We also do family stabilization and housing support on our CalWorks program in San Diego. Huge numbers here of people that we've served. Some positive impacts here from people who moved forward and are now in permanent housing. Josh, and then the other. And then these are the outcomes from our Dane County and Chicago, Illinois projects. Again, just showing that, we've been in Dane County since January and been able to place 39 households into permanent housing. So it may seem like small numbers to some people, but it's really impacting people's lives in a really positive way.
I want to just add, we do not sit here, please know that, and claim to have all of the answers. You will never see me agree to that. But But as Stacia mentioned, we have a lot of passion and we have a commitment. We actually hope that one day this company can be put to bed, can go away, because we've helped to do our part in eradicating homelessness. But the reality, unfortunate, is that we don't see that happening anytime soon. We are always very open to sit at the table with any organization, any company that's willing to partner with us, because this is a huge collaboration with you all, with other departments within the counties that we serve, as well as community partners, nonprofits in every local community. We try to be the vehicle for change, the vehicle for impact, but in no way are we able to do this type of work alone. And I just felt it important to share that with you, because together we will be able to impact lives together, understanding your initiatives and the focus areas that your board has will be able to help us be able to more powerfully go about doing that work on your behalf and making change happen for the better throughout Lane County.
Well, thank you, Ms. Peters and Ms. Gagne for the presentation. Wow. And we have that for the viewing public that's on, the entire slide deck is online. You know, I like what you say. We agree that we don't have all of the answers. You know, I think I used to think I had all the answers, and then I was elected to the school board and I realized that I hadn't even heard the questions yet. And so that's the important thing to recognize. And you mentioned Mr. Passons, who I briefly looked at his biography, and what an asset he's going to be as a consultant. We all look forward to meeting him once he does come to visit. And with that, Mr. Mokrowski, one last thing I'm going to say before I turn it over to the board. This has been a wonderful presentation. Thank you. My heart is beating loud and my blood pressure is down. Good things. Madison, Wisconsin, and Tillamook. Madison, Wisconsin, and Tillamook. Cool things come from Madison and Tillamook. Cheesemakers, we're sharp. Then turn it over to the board of unless Ms. Budd, do you have anything that you'd like to add, or some seeds you'd like to plant?
Oh, just sharing my appreciation to Stacia and Nicole for this presentation today. We've really appreciated working with yourselves and the great team that you've created. And I just want to highlight the fact that this truly is a collaborative community. And so we are simply just bringing another great agency to the table to help address the large needs that we have here in the community. And thanks to our existing providers in the community for welcoming this agency into the community and seeking to partner in as many ways as possible, because we continue to need additional services. And we know that our tried and true providers in the community are taxed, particularly due to COVID and the much greater capacity at which they're functioning at today and will continue to function. And so we're pleased to be able to bring this additional agency in to help with those capacity needs, and just enormously appreciative of the collaborations that have and will continue to be built within our community.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Budd. Very much. What a great team I see at the desk here today. I have more things to say, but I'm going to turn it over to the board, because if they say them, I'm not going to say them. So who's first? Commissioner Buck.
I seem to be first. I try to keep our meetings moving along. Where are you based out of?
Yes, Louisville, Kentucky.
Okay.
And I'm actually flying there this afternoon. I live in Southern California, but quite honestly, sometimes I feel like my home is on planes. But yes, Louisville, Kentucky.
And you're a for-profit company?
Yes, yes.
The reason I ask is, I have a background working for our largest social service nonprofit here in town, and I am generally highly skeptical of for-profit out-of-town entities coming in, and especially for this most vulnerable population. I don't want the community to see or have the perception that there's any money to be made off our most vulnerable communities. Can you please speak to that?
Almost definitely. That's one of the reasons why we make sure that we hire local that we're pulling from the expertise of local organizations. And quite honestly, you know, what this is for us is the opportunity to be able to touch, to be able to support and impact more individuals. We're definitely new to Eugene, but we've been in the Pacific Northwest, in Oregon and Washington, gosh, for what, over 20 years. So definitely new to your county. We've been doing business though throughout the state of Oregon. I understand your kind of probably push and pull regarding for-profit corporations doing this business. We are still very much at our infancy stage. And I don't mind sharing, we've actually began looking, should we be a nonprofit organization or should we stay for profit under, you know, under our current business model? Quite honestly, we're open to either. So we're working with individuals to figure that out for us. But you know, just try to hear me loud and clear. Our commitment to doing the work is there regardless of our structure. From a financial standpoint, we're not, and I know this is kind of my finance side of the house that kind of keeps us in balance. But by no means are we looking to create great profit from this, or you can chime in, but
I can just share my personal experience and background was nonprofit social services. From the time I first started doing, my whole background is accounting and finance. So when I came to Equus 10 years ago, I was a project accountant and moved into operations out of the passion I have for people later on down the road. But I have been doing finance and accounting for 30 years for both for-profits and nonprofits, but predominantly for nonprofits. I was a consultant to nonprofits in San Diego County, specifically for social services. And the only reason why I bring that up is knowing what we bring to the table. I know our financial structure and I know the financial structure of the nonprofits that I worked for. And, you know, we're a very conservative for-profit entity as far as, you know, the wages and the profit. No one is getting rich off of the work that we're doing. The profit that we do have is partly because the parent company, originally founded in 1968, ResCare, a lot of the work they do is billed under Medicare, and they're the largest private provider of services to people with disabilities. They do a lot of work with TBI or traumatic brain injuries. So in order to do that, because I had asked when I first got here, why are we not nonprofit? So they had explained to me that when you do that kind of work to bill Medicare, you have to be for profit. You can't do that as a nonprofit. And that's part of why the parent company was for profit. But I noticed when I got here right away that our profit margins are smaller than the reserves and the excess that I saw in the nonprofits that I worked with. So I think it's that there's a business reason why the company was founded as for profit, which is why Nicole mentioned that we had talked about, since Equitable is new, is there room, is there a reason, should we maybe look at being a nonprofit company? So I hope that.
I appreciate the background. It is good to know that you've worked in Oregon for some time and that we're just a newer community. So I appreciate that very much. You know, I'm personally not interested in making any profit off our most vulnerable people. So I'm happy to hear that you're considering perhaps that is an avenue you might go towards in the future. But ultimately, I still want to welcome you to our community with open arms, and I want to see what the results are. There are different kinds of models of how to service our vulnerable populations. And you are a different model that perhaps we have not seen here before. And I'm very interested in seeing how those results compare to other results that we are so familiar with in our community. And I'm knowing that we need capacity. What I don't want to see is like we're seeing a for-profit entity come in and perhaps hire some of those folks that were in our nonprofit community doing the same work, but get higher pay, which means we're not paying our nonprofits enough to keep their staff, which has been an ongoing issue. So those are just some of the concerns I want to bring to the table. But do know that I'm very interested in seeing your model here locally and what happens and what results produce, and then being able to take an objective view and see if this is working. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Commissioner Bernie?
Not yet.
Vice Chair?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Welcome. I would echo everything Commissioner Buck said. She shared some of my concerns, phrased a little differently, but the fundamentals are there. So I also appreciate the background. I have a couple of just clarifying questions, because when you say we, do you mean Equus? Do you mean Equitable Solutions? I have a couple of questions. So the sort of help me understand again the connection or lack thereof, or structure of how those two entities relate to each other as it relates to this project.
Yes, so
Navigation Center.
So from a organizational structure for this project, you would see Mark Douglas serving as president, myself as vice president of operations, and then Stacia Peters as regional director. And then we have David, of course, who's local, who's the project director, and then his team. Again, though, this is, we are at the early stage of building this organization. The plan, of course, is to look at, just like you all want to see the results, we have to see, does it make sense for us to then create its own leadership, right? And but right now it's shared. I'm a shared resource to Equitable as well as Equus as well as Stacia. Local team, no. Local team is 100% to the Lane County Equitable Social Solutions Project.
Got it. Thank you. And then what about the interface? And this might be a question for Kate Budd as much, between your organization and our housing services, and what that sort of tactically, what the relationship entails and how we're working together.
So we, of course, have entered into a contract with Equitable Social Solutions and are working with Stacia as the regional director and David as their project director to move the program forward. And so if we were to reach out with any type of asks or feedback, at this point, we would go to both Stacia and David to continue those conversations.
So it's an operator relationship, right? That's Equitable, not Equus. Okay, thank you. And then for the moment anyway, lastly, just was looking at Equus because I wasn't familiar with that until today a little bit while you were presenting. And I'm excited to see that you're working on multiple pieces of the puzzle of workforce, particularly around really just sort of the bread and butter issues. So I wanted to give you my full attention, so I didn't want to read too far into your website, but I was really appreciating seeing that the childcare system and workforce is one of your elevated tracks, as well as apprenticeship. So at some point, maybe not today, but I will be doing a little more research about Equus and understanding that entity. Of course, today we're here to talk about the contract that we hold with Equitable Social Solutions as it relates to running our shelter and navigation center. But I'm very interested in learning more about how those programs might come here to our community in a way that is complementary and value add to existing work, as opposed to, again, I think sort of Commissioner Buck was indicating around being a for-profit, not looking to sort of pull a market out from under existing efforts. So all very interesting. Thank you.
We actually very much when we decided to kind of give birth to this, we saw it as that our total collective organization comes full circle. So if we are able to meet someone where they're at today, who's experiencing an unstable housing instability, right, and we're able to then wrap services around them to get them to their next phase. Eventually, they could find themselves in a workforce, one of our one-stop operations or someone else's, right? I look at it as, in a sense, the pre-work to help build them up, to help get them stable emotionally, stable from a housing standpoint, in order to then help them become more employable, right? Because the only way that this is going to be resolved is if that person finds and gains a good employment, right? To be able to keep the housing that we hopefully are able to help them locate, right? The only way that they're going to be able to retain that and this become a sustainable situation is that they become an employee of some organization. And so when we looked at kind of creating that, that is truly the hope, but but we'll see where time takes it.
Yeah, thanks for that. I don't think anybody here disagrees with those hopes and that vision. I think we're really, if I'm reading some of my colleagues well enough, it's really that tension between essentially privatization of basic human needs versus keeping the accountability and the transparency that's inherent when you have it working through a local government and nonprofit relationship. I think that's
understood.
An antenna that are out that we're all just trying to be thoughtful, but also really open to and very much appreciating increasing the capacity in the community. We clearly need it.
Thank you, Vice Chair. For sure. Commissioner Bernie. Exactly.
I'll respond to anything, Chair. Welcome. Nice to meet you both. It's warmer here today than in San Diego. Did you come here for the good weather? You can respond if you want.
I live in the East County of San Diego, so it's actually warmer where I'm from. It was beautiful out.
Forgive me. I grew up surfing in Huntington Beach, and to me, San Diego is just the coast.
Yeah.
It's just the okay.
I don't see that part of San Diego very often, to be quite honest.
Oh, you poor thing. Okay. Yeah. My experience on the nonprofit versus profit side is that many for-profits are nonprofits. And my experience is that I wish you all the luck in the world. It sounds to me like you're starting off on this. You've gotten the contract, right, Ms. Budd? The contract is let. This is specifically for 1545 Brooklyn Street.
This is for the navigation.
It's for the
center,
navigation.
Hundred River Road.
Okay, so how much was the contract?
Little over 2 million per year.
Okay, and of that, and I'm not, I'm just of that. How many of those dollars are staying here for local people, and how versus going to whomever admin does not live in Lane County?
Well, they're 100%.
100% stays here.
Yes.
So none of this is paying for your trip to Kentucky.
For myself as well as Stacia, that is from a separate cost center.
So that can be a benefit, right, of
Right,
partnering
as
with
well
your
as
organization.
The use of Omar Passons, who we talked about, the consultant. That would not be from Lane County or any of our projects. Those are, corporate, I guess you could say, reserves or what have you, that pays for myself, Stacia, as well as his services.
So that's wonderful. That's wonderful. So that's an example of the benefit
Yes, yeah.
for our community, right? No, I think that's really cool. When I said welcome to Lane County, you mentioned Eugene. I just want to let you know all these little towns that have little, it's all Lane County. And my guess is clients that you're going to serve are going to come from all of these areas. I just have a couple of comments, if I may. We're on here, policy, etc. And that is, and I have a background a little bit in training from the Manpower Development Training Act through CETA, through private industry councils, through workforce development, blah, blah, blah. I don't know the degree to which you all have the ability to influence this, but I think what we're seeing more and more is moving from the traditional economy of organizing people to fit into jobs and into work. And there's more and more gray area of organizing work or jobs so that it fits the special needs and circumstances and skills, right? And things that we may have considered to be negative that in fact can be positive aspects of what humans bring with them to the table. That's not a new concept, but I think we're moving there. 35, 40 years ago, I worked with a company called New Ways to Work in San Francisco that's what they were all about. The timing wasn't really right. I hope the timing is more right. And I hope that your group is the kind of group that can help move us in that direction. I get to make some comments before you go. I hope your group is looking at what the Department of Labor is telling us are jobs for the future. The last time I looked at that, the 4 jobs that were expanding the most and pay following were solar installers, windmill technicians, home health care providers, and daycare providers. Construction being kind of undergirding all of that. So again, a national group like yours, or a group that's starting to become national, or a group that has national hopes, or whatever you want to say. I hope you can contribute to the general welfare of the circumstances, which, homelessness is good business, sadly, as you mentioned. And I understand your organization is built around the Alka-Seltzer 2. It was built to fall apart. You're hoping that you create a need and you don't exist. Sadly, I don't think that'll be the case. So I hope that's the case. The data you provided nationally was 2.5 years old. So that for me was kind of hard. And I didn't want to, put you on the spot. I don't want to now, but, I wanted to know where that data came from, how relevant it is, what the methodology was to generate it, how applicable it is to this particular area, what insights that provides you in your approach, blah, blah, blah. But the bottom line is that Lane County needs to build capacity. Kate, I think this is a strategic move on your part. I welcome it. I look forward to it. The concerns that previous board members have expressed, I get that. But I also think that we need as many people around the table as possible. I'm delighted to meet you both and have you join us and try and tackle this problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. And most of what I was going to say has been said, other than I'm going to add a couple of comments. But I'm going to go back to a couple of quotes, which I love to do. You said, who better than us and why not us? Based upon your presentation, I agree. Who better than you and why not you? And the answer is possibly nobody, and right on that it is you. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our community. I also said that everybody needs a little grace and everybody needs a personal cheerleader. And I think you've stepped into the role of a personal cheerleader for people who, in many cases, as good as we are and as wonderful as our nonprofits are, nobody has had the great personal cheerleader that they need to give them the self-confidence to do what they can do in addition to what we can do to help them do it. And you're in a position to really absolutely be at the front line, the very peak, the very point of that effort. And I'm excited to witness your work. I'm going to talk about profit versus nonprofit ever so slightly. I've worked in my life, I've worked for a world-class nonprofit that provides world-class service. I was the chief executive officer and CEO, the executive director of food for Lane County, which is one of the largest nonprofits of this type in the nation. I've also worked for a company that went from a tiny hardware store to a very large employee-owned organization, which is for profit. And really, when we talk about profit, what does it mean? It's unfortunate that we tag meanings, mental thoughts about what profit actually means. Because Peace Health, are they profit or nonprofit? Do they have an ending fund balance? I hope so. Otherwise, they're not going to do business. They don't call it profit. Does Jerry's have an ending fund balance? Yes, they do. And how does an employee-owned company use its ending fund balance, which is called profit, which we happen to call profit as opposed to an ending fund balance? Well, if they turn it back into wages, if they turn it back into expansion of their organization, do a better job of fulfilling their mission, then they're using their profit or ending fund balance wisely. And that's what we should judge people on, not on the term profit, but on what do you do with the excess money that is left over, what we sometimes call gross margin, what's left over after you've paid your bills and after you've paid your staff. What do you do with that? Do you turn it back into the people you serve, the people you've identified in your mission? If you do that, bravo, more power to you. Make more profit, please. because that is what profit should be all about. And in our definition, when we are serving the most vulnerable people in our community, which we all have a tremendous heart for. So welcome to the team doing that. Welcome to working with Ms. Budd, who I have such an incredible high degree of respect for since Ms. Budd has come to this organization. I'm excited. Once again, my heart is beating loud. My blood pressure has been lowered just hearing your presentation. You'll see me as a regular visitor as long as I'm not getting in the way of operation. I'm excited about how we move forward. So I'll ask you anything else you'd like to say.
I just thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
I'd mentioned Tillamook in Wisconsin and Madison, Wisconsin. You said Louisville too. That's where Johnny Unitas played football. Oh my gosh, nothing but the greatest places. I love it. Then this is a discussion and not an order today. So we have no business to conclude unless anybody wants to make a motion. I don't think we have any before us. Further discussion from the board, Commissioner Burney.
As you move forward, I would like to offer to introduce you to the Lane County Labor Council and to the Lane County Building Trades Association. You mentioned apprenticeships and you mentioned employment. And I'd like to connect you with them if I might.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, because we're developing. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Burney. Anything further? Then once again, Ms. Budd, thank you for bringing this panel forward to us, and thank you for your work. Thank you for your ongoing work. We talked about hanging lanterns and shining lights. We're hanging a lantern on you. We're shining a light on you. So looking forward to the work you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Then Mr. Mokraisi will step forward we stepped back and now we're still moving down the agenda. So for you, we are at a point where any further county administration announcements.
I don't have anything else unless you have questions for me, Chair.
Any questions for Mr. Mokraisi? What was the announcement you made earlier?
Just talking about elections, the special election next week and the introduction of our new county clerk.
Right on. And so we are tasked with sending out the ballots, bringing in the ballots, counting the ballots, and paying for all of the things associated with the recall that we're working on that has been put before us.
I need to check on the cost of that. If there's a cost share that the city of Eugene, it's a recall election for the city for a councilor seat for the city of Eugene. So I'm not exactly clear on if there is a cost share that's happening there, but I can check on that.
But our county elections office is staffing up to.
We are running that. Yes, correct. We're running that special election as well as the general election in November.
Perfect. And we're equipped to do both. But very good. Okay, thank you, Ms. Mokrasi. Then we'll move down the agenda to commissioner business. Any announcements from the Board of Commissioners? There's got to be announcements. Okay. I see none. Future board assignment requests. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to make a request that for a year, there's been a new executive director of the Lane Regional Air Pollution Authority, LRAPA, and I would like to request that we have maybe a 5-minute on the agenda item so that he can address this body. We do provide support to LRAPA with other municipalities. I think he represents a change in the direction of that body. So that's one request. I have a second request, and I don't quite know how to phrase this request, but I'd like to have a work session on looking at the implications, both financial and programmatic, of considering freezing property taxes for persons that are 65 years and older. One might want to add layers of criteria to that. Staff would know that better than I, but I've had too many in Springfield examples of people complaining to me that it was increasing property taxes. It was driving some of our more vulnerable seniors out of their homes. So I would like to request a work session. I'm just looking at what the implications of that might be. It might be unworkable. I don't know, but that's my request.
Thank you, Commissioner Burney. Very good. Any further requests?
Just want to make sure, Chair, before, yeah, you get head nods on both of those.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm so, yeah.
Then,
The first one was asking if El Rapa, Executive Director, could address the board.
sure.
And the second one was a work session to see if it's even feasible to look at the implications of some kind of property tax freeze for elderly 65 and over.
I have a clarification on that. Do you want a report back? I think it would be more from our treasurer to give us a report back because you're looking for information from staff.
Financially, I mean, this was my thinking, Commissioner Heather. Financially, yes, I would want to look at those implications, but I would also like to hear from program people. For example, if the home share program was something that maybe was attached to that in terms of bedrooms. We talk about, getting people sheltered. I just don't know if there would be what implications, program and financial, might occur if we considered such a freeze on property taxes.
So for me, that's still. I would feel comfortable with a report back.
Okay, but I'm good with that. I just want to bring up the issue and have us discuss it. So that makes sense. Report back.
So head nods. Yep. So you have three.
So I hear that as probably a report from the assessor on whether or not freezing property taxes for folks within an age group, that's what I heard you say, above 65 and older, is something that can actually be done.
Is feasible.
Right.
Whether there might be layers of that as it relates to their income so that it's more targeted, and a report from program people, if that were in place, whether that might provide incentive for them to house more unhoused.
Yeah, I think that is a question about because that's a whole nother layer. So I guess one question I'd have is, do you want to just get the first question answered about whether or not it's actually feasible to do? And then the second layer would be the programmatic aspect, which is another part of the organization.
What would be the criteria for feasibility? I just wanted to look at what the financial impacts would be, and if there were layers that it could be more targeted. Isn't it
the assessor would have to determine whether or not an age group could be isolated. And
okay,
I don't know the answer to that question. I think that's a question assessment taxation would have to answer.
I'm fine. I just want to start introducing the topic. So whether it's starting there and perhaps expanding based upon what we hear, but where I'm ultimately going is how do we keep people in their homes, and how do we perhaps create incentives for people to participate in home sharing? So however we approach that and whatever is the appropriate next step. Is that clear?
So, okay, so it sounds like you're more interested in the home sharing portion of it than maybe the first part of the question.
I'm interested in both because the first part of the question relates to those people who are on the fringes and whose property taxes are pushing them to be more vulnerable.
If I'm understanding, Commissioner, and from what our administrator showed, they really are two separate. First and foremost, the issue specifically about property taxes and whether we have the data available to understand the demographics of the payers is the first thing. So let's get that. I would.
That's why I was
getting that
agreeing with that
information because that seems pretty straightforward. And then once we have that information, that can become part of another. Then that's just data that could help drive a further assignment about what are we doing to help seniors be part of the solution of if it's home share or other programmatic work. That seems like a less direct, specific, easy question asked and answered sort of.
I share you more articulately, I said the same thing. I agreed to Commissioner Buck, which was, yes, let's start with financial feasibility and see if that can lead to these other areas.
I guess what I'm saying is what I'm head nodding to is asking for that specific demographic and data impact question to get answered first. And then the programmatic piece seems like a separate assignment, and I'm not
demographic.
Understand it enough yet, whether I want to.
Right. Demographic, data, and financial, fiscal.
All good? All good?
Yeah.
And Mr.
Thank you.
Reisky, can you, we'll move along to review of assignments and
I just have those two, the request for an LRAPA presentation. And the second one, a report. And I'm just saying a report from assessment taxation on the feasibility of property tax freeze for individuals within certain demographic and income levels, as well as the potential financial impact of that.
agree
Yes.
with that. And you got 3 head nods on both of those. Excellent. Thank you, Ms. Mokarski. I'm going to say to anybody watching that we have concluded this morning's business. And we jumped ahead on some things before our time certain. So if you're here for this morning's business or just to say hello, hi, good. We do have an audience for those of you who may be watching. We do have an audience of some pretty instrumental, far-reaching, and commanding individuals. So thank you for being here this morning. Then board, we have an executive session, which will start at 1:30 today. And it'll be a remote executive session that will absolutely be followed by a return to regular session. So we have an agenda for this afternoon. And at the sound of my gavel, we will recess the Board of County Commissioners regular meeting and we will reconvene at 1:30 in remote session for executive session. The Board of County Commissioners, small writing, we'll start that again. The Board of County Commissioners will meet in executive session to consider the employment of a public officer, employee, staff member, or individual agent. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602A, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session is as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. Reserve the right to come back out into public session should the need arise.